waiting for you.
The story of cruising is not as important, in my mind, as the cinematic value of cruising and the look of the film and what Billy Friedkin brought to that.
Most of the crew I had worked with on previous films. Jimmy Contner was a great camera operator. I knew him over the years, and I asked him if he thought he was ready to light a picture. And he said, yes, I think I'm ready. And so I let him be the DP on cruising.
I think he wanted to fight against some of the drama of it, so we didn't go into heavy shadow. I had actually was trying to get Billy to shoot it in black and white.
I've heard stories of your midnight moves.
It's such a black and white world. I mean, you know, you look at the way people dress. Actually, we kind of succeeded in shooting the film in black and white, but in color. If you notice, there's very little color in the movie. It's all monochromatic. A lot of leather and white T-shirts and black jeans. And so it kind of has that flavor anyway of being a black and white movie, but it doesn't have the real texture of a black and white movie.
Long before we got in the street to physically do this movie, the community was aware. They certainly were aware of the book. And it had been in the newspapers that this movie was going to be made. We went out and secured the services of the community to be a part of the movie. And they truly came and were a part of the movie. Now, as the movie was being made, there then became another side of that community that had balked, if you will, at the making of this movie.
I view every film as an adventure and an education. And the demonstrations were a complete surprise to me, but they kicked in almost at the beginning. There were a lot of protests against the film in the press and then publicly, and I understood them. I understood where they were coming from. I also understood that the demonstrators were trying to shut down free speech. There were a lot of high-profile gay figures in New York and elsewhere around the country, and politicians who put a lot of pressure to close the movie down and not let it film.
There was the deliberate attempt to make a lot of noise, usually with whistles and some sort of blaster, some air horns, which would ruin the sound takes.
In some cases, they got access to apartments next to where we were shooting and would turn the stereo way up.
We were in New York for a month and a half just ADRing actors, replacing their dialogue because while Billy was shooting, it would screw up all the dialogue.
And then actually they were quite clever. Some activists would get on some of the rooftops and near the set where we were shooting with big reflectors, and they would reflect light onto the set, so throw off the whole lighting setup, and that too would be very disruptive.
There were a couple thousand guys out on the street chanting some slogans and hey, hey, ho, ho, movie cruising's gotta go.
There were literally times where they had to come get me from my dressing room and escort me down to the set.
I had never seen the ferociousness of the people who didn't want that movie done. Figure that most movies get 3 or 4 cops on a movie from the movie unit. We had 300 cops there.
It was madness, total madness. The gay community was up in arms, and I went to meetings every 15 minutes with the gay community and the Gay Alliance and this and then my friends. All my friends that wouldn't talk to me for 6 months that were gay.
There were 2 factions of the gay world then, and there were nights when we were filming when there were thousands of people yelling and screaming and throwing cans and rocks and bottles. And joining us on our side were more thousands of guys who supported the leather bars.
I remember we went into the luncheonette coffee shop to film to rehearse that scene, and in the half hour or so that we were in the coffee shop, a crowd of probably a couple hundred people had formed outside the coffee shop and had basically stopped traffic, stopped all commerce on the street. They realized they had to get Al out of the coffee shop, and he would have to go through this crowd. There was no back way. So his bodyguard said, well, I'll call my office uptown, and I will get 10, 12 guys to come down here, and we'll make a human wedge. The car will be pulled up to the corner, and you'll just run through the wedge into the car, and we'll take off. He was sitting there very morose, and I walked up to him and I said, Al, can I come with you? He said, what? I said, you know, I'm never going to have to leave anywhere in a wedge. I'm never going to be famous like Al Pacino. I want to go. It's like the Beatle escape, right? So he said, okay, you think this is funny? Sure, okay. And sure enough, they made this wedge. They throw open the door, and these people yelling, Mr. Pacino, Mr. Pacino! And the protesters are screaming, and the cameras are there saying, can we speak to you? Can we speak to you? And I run with Al and Pacino into the wedge, into the back door. The car pulls away. I was laughing upwards. I said, that was great. That was great. And Al's in the front seat like this.
But Billy was undaunted by all the pressure, and if he went through anything, maybe he went home and screamed in the bathtub, but I never saw him flinch. You know, he would have made a good cop.
And of course, in hindsight, I realized that cruising was not the best foot forward that you can put as an argument for the acceptance by heterosexual people of the gay lifestyle. It was never meant to be emblematic of anyone's lifestyle, but it did exist. And to me, it was a background for a murder mystery, period. Yet it became a cause célèbre for others to try and show that certain insensitive people like myself were using the mainstream media to slander gay people, which could not have been further from the truth.
Are you afraid?
Should I be?
In terms of violence in cruising, I had depicted these murders the way I had heard about them.
Now I'm afraid.
The way I had been given the facts through police department files about how certain victims had been murdered. What I decided to do was have what appeared to be one common murder weapon. So this would lead you to believe that all the victims were the victims of the same killer, because there appeared to be this long-bladed, serrated steak knife that did the killings.
This is what you're looking for.
But it isn't really clear whether it is or not. Of course, the other thing I had in mind with the knife, of course, was the metaphoric idea of penetration. You know, that the knife penetrating flesh was similar to the act of sexual penetration, and that this was probably something that motivated the killer or killers, ultimate penetration. I didn't want to be any more graphic or violent than what you see in Psycho, which, as I say, is an illusion of graphic murder. So I never felt it was a very important part of cruising to have the murders be too graphic.
I remember the day that they shot my death scene.
Landlady discovered the body about 2:30 a.m.
They laid me down by the toilet bowl, and there I was, and there was a David Bowie album cover, and there was this picture of David Bowie on the cover, kind of like this. It was this odd picture. I can't remember who took it, but it was this akimbo kind of pose, and he showed it to me. He said, "This is what I want you to do on the floor. I want you to be in this kind of odd, broken doll sort of pose." So I thought that was pretty genius. You know, I thought that was a great thing to do. And they said, "We have to put 57 stab wounds on you." I thought, you know, one didn't kill me, you know, but they wanted it to be the most extreme, and in a way, sort of the sacrificial lamb character in the movie.
Billy wanted a bloodbath in there. I remember, more blood, and he wanted to really be horrific to look at. That was about as graphically bloody as we got, I think.
The one next door is registered in the name of John Forbes, and landlady thinks it's a phony because she ain't seen him in a couple of days.
What's that name?
John Forbes.
Because he also was trying to lead the audience. He really wanted the audience to think it was Al, and Al had displayed quite a violent temper in an earlier scene.
You're in love with him! You love kids, don't you?
I felt that I wanted to portray the idea that The murders were unsolved, really. There were many possibilities of who the murderers could be. It just seemed to me that it was a metaphor for so much that happens in our lives, the mystery of fate.
I can't believe you're not afraid.
In the first killing in the St. James Hotel, Larry Atlas is the killer and Arnaldo Santana is the victim.
Where are you, man? Come on.
And then in the Central Park killing, you have Larry Atlas, who was the killer in the St. James killing, and he's being killed by Richard Cox. So then you have in the Peep Show, the guy who walks into the Peep Show is Arnaldo Santana, who is the victim of the first killing. And the killer inside the Peep Show is actually Richard Cox.
I said, turn over.
And then on top of all that, you've got all the actors being dubbed by another actor who never appears on screen, and that's James Sartorius.
Oh, that's too bad. How about the park?
And sometimes the words that come out of my mouth are in my father's voice, which was also James Sartorius.
You know what you have to do.
That voice was recorded after the scene was shot. We re-recorded it.
You made me do that.
So he's, in some kind of schizophrenic way, acting out his father or being his father.
That voice also is in Cox's scene, in the very last scene of him in the hospital. They use the same voice actor to put in his mouth of, I never killed anyone.
I never killed anyone.
A lot of people asked me, so who is the killer? And my standard answer was, who do you want it to be?
I don't know who that character is that's entering the club at the beginning and the end.
I don't know. I don't know who do you think the killer is?
I think one of the things that Billy was saying is that there's this X factor out there, that there's a violent killer always lurking that goes on. There'll always be another.
That's something that, is enigmatic enough to unsettle the audience, that's all.
You want to play? I'll play with you.
I had always felt that cruising should be an unsettling experience.
I'm back. Can I stay?
Sure.
Since the whole movie is about transformation, it occurred to me somewhere along the line that the only real female character in the film should have her own transformation, at least visually. And the shot of Pacino shaving and then finally just staring into the mirror at the audience is something I had in mind throughout as being the next to last shot of the film. What it's meant to suggest or to say is, when you look at someone, do you really know who they are? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I am? Do I know? And who are you? I had no intention of making a statement, one way or the other, about what was happening in the leather bars. I went in pretty much with documentary-type cameras and recorded what I saw. And there's no comment made in the film about what the audience is seeing. There's no comment from me or from any character in the film that this is right or wrong or immoral or moral or whatever. And that's how I feel about it today.
I knew that this film was way, way ahead of its time. And I knew it was going to be probably the most difficult film to make than any film I would ever do in my career. And it turned out to be that. But it was an experience, and it had to be done, and it had to have a director who wouldn't quit, who had the edge and the stick-to-itiveness and no fear, and that's Billy Friedkin.
I think by the end of the film, I was so drained I don't think I had any sense of, what it was going to be. It was a huge undertaking, really difficult. We didn't have a lot of money. We were very ambitious. Billy was very tough. It was a controversial subject. It was a movie that could have gone any way. So there was a real sense of, I don't know what it's going to be.
Editing is something that I think is probably the most creative part of making the film. And I've very often gone in, because of the freedom of the cutting room, and changed sequences, changed the order of scenes, used the editing room as a kind of experimental bin as well. And in Cruising, there is subliminal imagery. The whole notion of the subliminal is that it is not something that you are to be directly conscious of. I've used subliminal imagery in many of my films, because to me it's the way the mind works.
You made me do that.
What's graphic is what Billy makes you feel, because a lot of it you don't see, and a lot of it you hear. It's more what he's created in your mind, which is what film is about.
I've always conceived of the films I've made, the soundtrack, being completely separate from the photography, completely separate. The sound should be saying and doing more. Subtle little sound effects that often cannot be heard but are subliminal.
I was instrumental in hiring the sound people to do that, and that was Chuck Campbell and his company, and they hired this guy, John Resch, who was a great Foley man for all the footsteps and the leather squeaking and all the stuff and the chains rattling, and because they all wore chains and leather boots and leather jackets and leather hats, so that all has a character of squeaking.
And then comes the music, a layer of music, which has its own path. Bud Smith introduced me to Jack Nietzsche, who did a lot of sounds and additional music for The Exorcist. But the kind of sound and music that Jack was skilled at doing at that time was not using musical instruments. He would just rub on the edges of a glass to get a kind of a mournful tone. He would do various other things with non-musical instruments to produce music. I like the idea of the music to be used more like tones, like a cold hand on the back of your neck.
And Jack did a brilliant job of not only scoring it, but finding the right groups to record.
It was the beginning of the punk movement, and some of the groups in Cruising were some of the great punk and grunge artists of the 70s in Los Angeles. The music of the gay bars were not as edgy then as the music in Cruising is. It's very edgy and dark, and the songs are great. We had a lot of trouble with the ratings board, and I do remember there was a preview of the film in New York in a theater on the East Side, and I was walking from my apartment to the theater to show up at this press conference after the film had been shown to an enormous horde of media. And I remember as I was walking toward the theater, the screening had just emptied out, and I saw just a few people that I knew coming out, and one of them said, "Are you going in there to do a press conference?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Wow, are you going to be in trouble?" And I went in, and that whole press conference was a screaming match. Most of the reviews were highly negative on all counts, which changed some 10 or 12 years later. Now, I have no idea what the reaction to Cruising will be today. It may be just as virulent, for all I know, because I wasn't prepared for its initial reaction. But I do believe that with what has come along since Cruising, both in terms of motion pictures and lifestyles, that it will at least be more understood. Perhaps not. I know that Cruising is a controversial film. I knew it when I made it. I didn't know to what extent, and I know it now.
I'm scared to death of Cruising myself.
It's a world unto itself.
My hopes have been realized for that film. It's been recognized, and it is recognized, and people know it. It's a title that everybody who goes to film knows.
I need to talk to you, but I want to tell you everything.
Whether you like it or hate it, it's very unconventional, and it's original. It doesn't owe itself to anything. There is no film that I ever saw that is like that. As I look at it, I can understand now a lot of what I didn't understand, which is its power to affect people at some of their deepest levels.
How'd you like to disappear?
I don't think I can handle it.
I've never killed anyone.
What I'm doing, it's effective. I need to be worshipped and adored.
One day this whole city's gonna explode.
I'm afraid.
I wish just once you'd say something positive to me.
There's a lot about me in him. Don't let me lose you.
You're here. You know what you have to do.
Jerry Weintraub, the producer of Cruising, sent me a book by a man named Gerald Walker, who was a crime reporter for the New York Times, called Cruising. It was about murders in gay bars in New York, but it had been dated, this book. It had come out a few years earlier, and by then the situation of the bars had completely changed. They went underground and became heavy leather, sort of sadomasochistic bars, and I thought that Walker's book didn't capture that, and so I had no interest in it. It turns out that initially Phil D'Antoni, who produced The French Connection for me, had optioned the book.
I was the cop in The French Connection, played by Roy Scheider. And to me, that was my introduction to this business.
Listen, we got enough to stick you away for 3 years right now.
I was now working with Phil D'Antoni. I was still on the job, but I was working with him and trying to combine both things. He bought the rights to the book Cruising.
It didn't work out. They couldn't get it sold. And Weintraub had heard that I might be interested in doing something like this. So he optioned the book and came to me.
I found it to be an important piece of literature, and I wanted to buy it and own it, so I did. And I put it in my drawer and kept it there for a while. I was out to dinner with Billy one night. We were close personal friends, and we were out to dinner. But I said, I have one thing in my drawer, and you might spark to it. And he said, what? I said, it's a book called Cruising.
I really wasn't interested because, as I say, the book did not reflect what I knew was the emerging gay situation in New York City. And then I started to read a series of articles about what was happening in the leather bars and how dangerous the situation had become. A series of mysterious deaths had occurred in these bars, and that piqued my interest. And I said to Jerry, the leather bars would be a really interesting background for a murder mystery like Cruising. And so if we can set it up in that way and do a completely original take on it, and so Jerry agreed. And I then set out to find out as much as I could about the leather bar.
I get a call from Weintraub. He says, listen, Billy told me to call you. I said, anything with the Billy, I'll do whatever he wants me to do, you know? So we got involved with cruising, and we did all the research and going around.
I said to Billy, why don't we go to New York and go to these clubs and see if this is really happening? That's what we did. And we found it happening. It was there in front of our eyes, live and in Technicolor.
And we hung around for several nights, and they were all theme nights. One night it was cop night, where everyone in the bar dressed as a cop. What interested me was the make-believe aspect of it, because most of the guys who were in that world dressed in outlandish, often S&M costumes, were by day they worked in shops on Madison Avenue, they were stockbrokers, they were lawyers. They had this one life over here, and then they had this other life in the leather bars.
People I knew from business that had a dual life, 2 lives. They had this life at night and that life during the day.
We got a hand here. If we can get a fingerprint, we can make this a homicide.
And then there were these disappearances of certain people connected with the bars and murders. And then their body parts were found floating in the East River.
You know I can't prosecute a homicide without a cause of death.
Then it turns out that a good friend of mine, a police detective in New York named Randy Jurgensen, had, when he was on the police force in his 19 or 20-year career, he had been assigned to the leather bars to go in undercover as a gay man, and he told me some of his stories and what it did to his own psyche.
After 2 years, 2.5 years in narcotics, I got a call to go to the Manhattan District Attorney's office, and I met another patrolman, and his name was Mel Waxman. We were told that gays were being shook down by a male white and a male black, which became known to us as a salt and pepper team. They suspected that they were cops.
How do you know they're cops?
Because they're wearing shields and riding around in a radio car.
And these cops would take the gay person and make him draw out his savings, or even contact his parents and draw out their savings. Then there was 2, possibly 3 killings connected with this.
How'd you like to disappear?
Disappear?
Go undercover.
So Mel Waxman and myself were sent out into that world to come up with the killers.
What the hell is this?
It was brought to a successful conclusion. They went to trial, and they were never convicted on the killings. However, they were given big time, if you will, for extortion, assault, kidnapping, and they went to jail. And they were not cops. That was the happy ending for me.
The other facet that became very important to cruising was a link to The Exorcist, actually. When I filmed The Exorcist in New York, one of the scenes that we shot was the examination of the little girl's brain, and I filmed that sequence with the actual radiologist who does it and his assistant. Now, these were not actors. The assistant was a very pleasant young man named Paul Bateson. When it came to do cruising, I read in the New York Daily News that Paul was being held for the murder of the man who was the critic for Variety magazine in New York, whose name was Addison Verrell. And according to the charges, Paul had gone to Mr. Verrell's apartment and bludgeoned him to death. These were the charges. And he was being held at Rikers Island pending his trial. So I went down one day to Rikers Island and I met with him and we had a very pleasant chat. And so It was that real connection to a killer and then my own observation of what was going on in the leather bars, as well as the essence of Gerald Walker's book, that got me interested in doing cruising.
When he started to work on the screenplay, we then began to go out to various locations of where these things happen. This is the hotel that I used, and here was the clubs that I went into. This is the apartment where I lived in. One night, my phone rings, and it's Billy. And he said, I've come to a part, he said, in this screenplay where I need Al Pacino to get into the killer's apartment without the killer knowing it. I had an occasion in my career to go into an apartment after somebody, and I said, Billy, here's how I did this. When this individual left his apartment in broad daylight, I went across the street, climbed up the ladder, went up the fire escape, and went in the window. And Billy looked at me and I said, Billy, what you have to remember is that I'm a cop. If anybody stopped me from going up the fire escape, I would have showed them my shield and I would have said to them, I'm a cop working. They would mind their business. We got back 2 o'clock in the morning and Billy wrote that. With Billy, whatever it was, it had to be real. Could this happen? Things like this 250-pound detective with a cowboy hat, a jock strap. This happened in real life.
Who is that guy?
All right. You give me a cause of death.
I can't give you the cause of death from this.
As he continued to write and we continued to go to the various locations, Billy said to me, we're going to use the morgue. And I said, Billy, out of all the permits and out of all the places and all the courtrooms that I've gotten you into, I'm never going to be able to do the morgue. It took me a while, but I got from Dr. Michael Baden, the chief medical examiner of the city of New York, permission to go in and film in the morgue.
After I wrote the script and it went around to the various talent agencies, a short time later, word came in from Al Pacino's agent, and he said, listen, Pacino has read this script and loves it and wants to do it. And so I met with Jerry Weintraub, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, I don't know, he's a very good actor, and if you want to, let's do it with Pacino.
The first question that he said to me was, did you really wear leather during that period? Did you really do that? And I said, yes, Al, I did. And from there, it was Al Pacino asking questions and then becoming the sponge, if you will.
I did talk to him a lot about what the gay scene was. He had no idea what was happening, but he did speak to a few friends of his who were gay, and one day he said he wanted to go out and get a haircut like the one which he saw being predominant in the gay world in New York, and the haircut didn't work out too well. And so we had to delay the start of production for a while his hair grew back in. I put him right into these scenes and situations, and he was fairly well shocked by a lot of the things that he saw with all of this sexual activity, in fact, going on all around him. Very often he would come to the set, and then he wanted to basically go out and improvise these scenes until something clicked. In looking at Cruising now, I can see that in many ways he has struck just the right note, a note of innocence in his character.
Yellow one, left side means you give golden shower, right side you receive. The red one means...
See anything you want?
I'm gonna go home and think about it.
Before cruising, I met Billy Friedkin in a film called Boys in the Band. It was about the gay life in the village. With Billy, I went on a few scouts with him, let's say. Went to a few bars. He definitely wants realism and, in many cases, real people. He would only want to see the people I would hire. He doesn't want to see 30 people for a part. So I would bring 2 people or 3 people. The other characters who are in the film do what I appreciate in a film performance. They inhabit the characters. They don't play them. They inhabit them.
At the time, I had been doing a very glitzy Broadway musical called Platinum. I got a call that Billy Friedkin wanted to see me for this movie. And I had a long meeting with him, and at the end of the meeting, he looked at me and he said, I want you to play this part. It was one of those actor's dreams.
I'm scared to death of cruising myself.
I was a working actor. I had done a lot of theater. I remember cruising particularly because I had worked with Al Pacino when I was like 16. But I walked in to meet Billy, and I had the dream audition.
Then I got a phone call. I was back in Los Angeles, and I got a phone call, and he said he was fighting for me with the studio. He wanted me to play that part, and if I would get on a plane, I think a red-eye, like later that night.
Billy sat there and he said, boy, I know all your work in the theater. So we're going to start in June. How's June for you? And I said, great. Are we going to read? He said, do you really want to? You don't have to. I said, you mean I have the job? And he said, yeah, you'll be great. This is great.
I flew to New York, and he photographed me on a pier in the Hudson River. We improvised a little bit, and the next day I had the part.
Have fantasy will travel.
My brother being Brad Davis, and he was actually an actor before I was. Brad was the one that drew me to New York, and I went to stay with Brad down in the West Village.
I was going to cast a fellow who was not an actor but was a transvestite. And then DeGimo told me that Gene Davis, who was a young New York actor at the time, was interested in playing this part.
I auditioned, did the reading, and he said, fine. And then he began to tell me about the role. He said, this is the character that you just auditioned for. I want you to come back, and we're going to put you in full drag. I want to see how you look in full regalia. We're going all the way out there. We're putting the bra on, we're putting the nails on, we're putting the makeup on. We're going to go the whole distance. I went, yes. And they pulled out the pants. They were about this big. I said, well, wait a minute. They said, don't worry, and they stretched them out. And they said, but you have to remember also, physically, I was camera ready. I was 125 pounds, 5'7", physically fit to go into that costume.
I had never really done anything except for stage, and I went in and I read for it, and I didn't get it.
You must be the famous John Forbes.
I auditioned for Friedkin. I did the reading. Al was there. He was kind of lurking, and they gave me the job.
The person who did get it, I guess, was in wherever they lived in New Jersey or whatever, and they were playing ball in the backyard and broke their arm that weekend. And he was supposed to start shooting the following weekend. So I came in again and I read for Billy, and Billy said, wow, that was great. Yeah, this is the guy.
Father, I need to talk to you.
Billy told me, I got a great guy to play your father. Suddenly, just before we shot it, I said, so who's going to play my father? I should meet him. I wanted to spend a little time with him. It turned out to be Leland Starnes, who was my dramat teacher at Yale, a guy who was very difficult. We didn't like this guy very much, and it was perfect for the relationship between me and my father.
I've tried to do everything you wanted, but it's never good enough.
I've taken it for granted that you understood, Stewie.
Maybe we should cut loose for a while.
Karen Allen came in to interview for the role, and I thought she had a really wonderful, soft, very feminine quality, which you wanted in a film like this as a complete contrast to all the male personalities, who were all type A violent males for the most part, with the exception of the Sorvino character. And I remember saying to Paul, I asked him to find the note of deep, profound sadness in his character that I think he successfully did with every scene he's in. He seems to be a man who has both seen and experienced great tragedy.
Lucas and Vincent were not in the mainstream of gay life. They were into heavy leather, S&M. It's a world unto itself. I don't know how much you know about that sort of thing.
Billy encouraged us to go into these bars and do our research, and boy, did we get an eyeful. It was something. And I went and I spoke to a lot of people who were into S&M.
A lot of us were, we were new actors. We were in that gritty 70s, you know, you gotta go and study what's going on and really live that part. And with a certain degree of caution.
You got a place?
Yeah, I have a place.
He likes actors to be off balance, and he would say that. He would sometimes prepare certain things and then pull the rug out from under you. He'd say, trust me. I remember working hard on what my room would look like with the designer. He encouraged me to do that, and then the room looked completely the opposite of what we'd worked on. He likes actors to be fresh and disoriented in a way.
I'm Ted Bailey. Dinner time, I only eat seafood. I gotta watch myself or I balloon up like Shelley Winters.
He felt that I did represent the other side of this lifestyle. For instance, the scenes I'm in are usually very sunny, and I think that was deliberate on his part, that this character has this sort of light that comes along with him, and he's the ultimate victim in the movie.
Name is Ted Bailey, works in a brokerage house downtown.
One day this whole city's gonna explode.
If you take this assignment, you'll come out with more experience than any of my detectives.
As far as I was concerned, this was a murder mystery with another backdrop. It was in the gay community, and that's really just what the greater circumstances were.
Billy, he was lit up. He was in a creative fervor, and a lot of stuff that was in the screenplay seemed to branch out in adventurous ways that were unexpected. And what an adventure it was. I mean, Al Pacino and I would walk home at night just trying to decompress after shooting down in very difficult conditions.